Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mardi, and I'm the president of the Sussex Politics Society. Thank you so much for joining us for this afternoon's event. It's a talk by Her Excellency Enna Park, the South Korean ambassador to the UK. Today's format is going to be slightly different to the last two formats in that there's so much to talk about that we thought it would be best to let Her Excellency take 15-20 minutes or so and just go through a number of relevant topics at the moment, including the pandemic, including relations with North Korea and UK-Britain relations. So we will do that. And after that, we'll follow that with a Q&A. So I'll begin by asking a few questions from myself on a number of different topics. But while I'm doing that and during Her Excellency's talk, you can also submit questions in the comment section of today's event. But first, we'll start with an introduction. So Ambassador Park has a long and illustrious career as a civil servant and diplomat, joining the South Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1985. She served in India, in New York, the UN, China, and now the UK. She's no stranger to the moniker of the first woman to, as she was the first female Korean diplomat to serve as an ambassador to a major power, and has been a key contributor in leading the international community's support for peace and denuclearisation of the Korean Peninsula. Ambassador Park has been a trailblazer throughout her career on issues such as human rights, women's status and empowerment, and refugees. And it is an absolute delight to have her here to join us today. And Ambassador Park, welcome to the Politics Society.
Thank you, Mr. Mardi Murtaza, for your kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to speak to you today. I hope everyone has been doing well and stayed healthy. In fact, I have been looking forward to visiting your prestigious university known as a leading research-intensive institution. I'm aware Success University has strong diversity with students from more than 100 countries. Surely it includes students from Korea. I really would like to see you face in face, but to my disappointment, this current COVID-19 situation means I am not able to do so, but I hope I have an opportunity in the future. Nonetheless, it is a great honor to be asked to speak about Korea. We talk about three topics, mainly on Korea's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. As you may know, Korea is praised as a relatively successful country in responding to the pandemic. Though the battle has not completed yet, and Korea is not a perfect example, sharing its strategies and experiences has relevance for other countries as reference. Then I'll talk about the Korea-British relations and some areas for broader partnership to build a better world. Lastly, I will touch upon the situation in North Korea. I'm an ambassador from South Korea, then why I talk about the North Korea? Because North Korea has remained as a hotspot, serious challenge to peace and stability of the Korean Peninsula, as well as the world as a whole since the Cold War. And the humanitarian situation of North Korean people is actually a matter for all. Let's go into coronavirus. Let's fight against it together. Are you ready? When coronavirus emerged several months ago in Korea, late January, the response of the Korean government was very swift. The most important lessons we learned from the MERS outbreak 5 years ago was the early response is the critical key. If you fail to catch the speed of spread of virus at the early stage, it would be very difficult to put it under control. So Korea immediately employed what we call the 3T strategy, or TTT strategy, based on the lessons we drew from SARS and MERS. TTT stands for testing, tracing, and treatment. Robust testing efficient tracing, and timely treatment. Testing. From previous experience, we knew that securing a robust testing capacity is critical for both treatment and containment of a novel virus. At the beginning, Korea had no test kit at hand like other countries, including UK. On the next day after the first confirmed case in Korea, we immediately commissioned the medical researchers to develop testing kits. Developing such kit usually takes several months, but this was an emergency. Thanks to tireless, sleepless efforts of researchers, a testing kit became available only 1 week after the first confirmed case. The Korean government sped up the official approval process, prompting companies to mass produce the kits, ensuring large stocks for widespread testing. As to tracing. Tracing is very essential. Tracking and tracing is not an easy job because it involves privacy issues. It needs a delicate balancing between public health and the privacy protection, which needs a legal framework on the scope of data to be collected and on how to utilize and when to be disposed under pandemic situation. Following the MERS break, Korean Parliament enacted a legal framework that allows authorities to legally collect personal data in case of an epidemic. So smartphones, digital records like GPS data, CCTV footage, and credit card transactions were all utilized as needed to ensure effective tracing of possibly contagious persons. At the same time, necessary measures to protect privacy were introduced, such as all information disclosed to public should be anonymized. The data collected is solely used to track coronavirus cases, and it should be disposed as soon as the case is resolved. Then third T, treatment. Timely and adequate treatment has contributed to one of the lowest mortality rate in the world. It is possible through close partnership between central and local government, as well as public and civic sectors. In nationwide mobilization of all available medical resources, both public, private, from national health care system, hospitals, universities, and private clinics. Utilizing this all, the government designed its designated exclusive COVID hospitals and categorized the patient into different groups according to their symptoms. So even people who are infected but didn't show any symptoms, they were placed under very tight monitoring to prevent them from spreading the virus to others. Through our strategy of early detection via testing and tracing, we are able to slow down the spread of virus and provide timely treatment to patients, saving many lives. The figures in Korea as of July 14th show that since the outbreak, there have been a total of 13,512 confirmed cases. Of these, 12,000 people have now recovered, leaving around 900 people currently under isolation or receiving treatment. Total number of deaths from the virus stands at 289. The fatality rate in Korea is currently at around 2%, which is much lower in comparison to other countries. Korea's achievement thus far is notable because we have a very large population, about 51 million, but we have still been able to contain the virus to a large degree. In Korea, it is noteworthy that we have had no lockdowns in place, no mandatory legally binding social distancing measures, all voluntary ones with no penalty, no fines, and no forced suspension of business except the temporary bans placed on mass gatherings, for example, at nightclubs. Oh, well, business in Korea, including most restaurants, shops, and hair salons, have been operating as usual. Performances such as the Phantom of the Opera and the films are being shown in theaters. Professional sports, including football and baseball, are taking place, though without spectators for time being. In fact, Korea was the first to kick off the football league games without spectators, quite innovative model, which was followed by many other countries. Furthermore, Korean stock market has rebounded to the pre-COVID-19 figures. In spite of these positive signs, there is bound to be a toll on the overall economic situation. We are particularly concerned about trade, as Korea relies heavily on it. As you may know, Korea is the world's 6th largest exporter and the 9th largest importer. In the first quarter of this year, Korean economy shrank 1.3% from the previous quarter. Trade volume fell 25% in April and in May compared to previous year. According to IMF figures released in June, the recent figures, the global economy is expected to shrink by 4.9%. As advanced economies, well, for OECD countries, advanced economies, average figure is minus 8% growth. Among those advanced countries, Korea's prospect is the highest, minus 2.1%. For developing countries, it is minus 3%. Minus growth for developing countries is first time ever. Despite of IMF figure to minus 2% growth for Korea, our government is more ambitious than that. So we will be working hard throughout the latter part of this year to avoid a negative growth rate if possible. So like many other countries, Korea has rolled out an economy response package totaling around $500 billion for stimulus, stabilization, and extra support measures. To return to the current COVID-19 situation in Korea, Koreans are currently celebrating its victory of the pandemic. No, not yet. We are far from complacent. Since early May, clusters of new cases have sprung up, including outbreaks at nightclubs in Seoul. Very recently, officials at the Korean Center for Disease Control and Prevention announced that Korea was in the midst of a second wave. Luckily, the second wave is modest. Daily number of new cases is between 30 to 60. More than half is from inbound travelers. Although the WHO executive director said overall case numbers in South Korea were very, very stable, Korea remains vigilant to guard against any possibility of a big wave of outbreaks. So therefore, we are continuing to mass produce testing kits and PPE for health workers. And our research institutes and the pharmaceutical companies are working around the clock to come up with vaccine and an effective treatment. Well, it's clear that no country can declare victory over this very dangerous virus until the whole world as a whole is free from it. That's why we need to work together by sharing data, information, experiences, and lessons to cooperate to develop a vaccine or treatment at the earliest possible extent. Let me now talk about the bilateral relations between Korea and UK. How long have our two peoples known to each other? Guess it. Official relations between the two countries began with the signing of Treaty of Friendship, Commerce, and Navigation in 1883. After a period of Japanese occupation of Korea, diplomatic relations between us were instated in 1949. 1 year later, when the Korean War broke out in 1950, the UK was one of the first countries to send troops to fight for Korea's freedom. After the United States, UK sent the largest number of troops to Korea, totaling about 100,000. Around 1,000 British soldiers sadly never returned home. People and government of Korea are grateful to this day for the sacrifices and great contribution made by British soldiers to uphold Korea's freedom. So we do not forget it. Korean War is not a forgotten war, never. Last month, UK Defense Secretary Ben Wallace and I held a commemorative event marking the 70th anniversary of the outbreak of Korean War, where we honored and expressed our deep respect to those who fought. The veterans who were present told me that they were very glad and so proud to see that country that they fought for has developed into a global economy power, as well as a full-fledged democracy. I had the privilege of thanking them personally on behalf of the people of South Korea. The relationship between the embassy and our veterans is very important to us. And to help ensure their safety, we sent face masks to all veterans and their families to help keep them healthy during this difficult time. Many veterans and family members found our gesture very moving. Our solidarity, which is formed in battles, remain as the solid foundation for our ever-growing friendship and partnership. Well, I'd like to share another story of our deep friendship that was not well documented in either Korea or in UK. During the Second World War, Korean resistance fighters served alongside British soldiers in Burma, now it's called Myanmar. One of their main tasks was to translate intercepted Japanese communications. I believe that these forgotten Koreans also did their part to assist British Army fending off Japanese aggression and reason. Well, another interesting anecdote involves the founding of the Hyundai shipbuilding company. I'm sure that many of you are aware of the Hyundai cars. The founder of the Hyundai Group, Mr. Jung, in early 70s, he was not able to secure a loan from any international financial institute to build the shipyard. Back that time, early 70s, Korea is a very poor country with no shipbuilding company and no records. And the story goes that Mr. Jung persuaded his British counterparts by showing a 101 currency bill of Korea, which has pictures of the so-called turtle ship. Jung explained that Korea built such advanced ship, world first iron-covered battleship in the 16th century. And Admiral Lee, who is a Korean hero, equivalent to Admiral Nelson, effectively defeated with only 12 total ships, the 10 times outnumbered enemy ships in naval confrontation. Actually, this battle was well recorded in the world naval war history. Anyway, Mr. Chung persuaded the British counterparts and he secured the loan from Barclays to build a shipyard. That shipyard became the #1 shipbuilder of the largest vessels, including container ship, cruise ship, and oil tankers in the world. What a beautiful example of our strong partnership. Well, coming back to today, on our economic front, trade between our two countries has steadily grown. Last year, Korean export to UK totaled $5.5 billion US, and imports from UK stood at $4.2 billion US. And we two countries have concluded a bilateral FTA last year, and we expect our trade volume will grow further once the adverse economic effects of COVID-19 wear off. Korea is one of the major non-EU investors to the UK. Traditionally, Korean companies have invested into service and finance sectors, but recently we expanded the scope of investment to infrastructure and nuclear energy sector. Korea and UK have a wider scope of cooperation beyond just the bilateral one to overcome common challenges with a view to building a better world. Let me emphasize two areas among others. One is climate change. South Korea is hosting the second P4G summit next year. P4G stands for Partnering for Green Growth and Global Goals 2030. And UK next year, COP20, and we hope that our P4G summit will serve as a stepping stone for a successful COP20 summit. The other area is international trade regime, which is getting vulnerable. In order to uphold the free trade regime, we emphasize 4 principles. Under this pandemic situation, we have to ensure the flow of goods in global supply chains, and we have to facilitate the essential movement of people, and we have to minimize negative impact on trade and investment arising from the pandemic. And we have to work together to promote an inclusive and sustainable economic recovery. Well, my last topic is about North Korea. And North Korea pandemic situation, we don't know exactly what is happening there. And North Korean Health Ministry has reported to WTO that they have no coronavirus case in their country. Their state media is claiming the same, but it's very hard to believe since they share a very long border with China. But on the other hand, there is no evidence to suggest that they are experiencing a huge outbreak either. Well, the South Korean government has continued to extend our willingness to talk with North Korea on issues such as public health, railway, and road reconstruction and establishment of international peace zone inside the demilitarized zone. Unfortunately, contrary to our expectation, in June, North Korea blew up the Joint Liaison Office located in North Korean city of Kaesong, which was a symbol of inter-Korean cooperation. And dealing with North Korea, we should be patient. So we will continue to work to solve the problem in a peaceful way. And we look at ways to work with North Korea while observing the irrelevant international sanction measures. But the task in front of us is quite grave. Well, in order to save time for question and answers, I'd like to close my lecture by saying that South Korea and UK should continue to work closely together to further strengthen our relationship, to help us all overcome the current pandemic and to keep the global economy moving forward so that we may obtain our common goals and interests. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Park. That was a fascinating talk, and you're absolutely right. There are a great number of challenges that our two countries need to face, and hopefully we'll work together in facing them. So I have a number of questions that I'd like to follow up on your talk with related to some of the things that you said. So I'll start by talking about South Korea's response. I think it's fair to say that South Korea's response to this the pandemic, initially it was criticized by some by saying that lessons from MERS was not learned, but very quickly, and it's clear to see over the last few months that it's been the complete opposite. In fact, South Korea is one of, if not the best success stories in the fight against COVID. And as you mentioned, one of the important elements of that is the trace aspect of it. And you touched briefly upon the balance that's required between public health and personal privacy. But it is true that such an app which does give information about individuals' locations could be seen as an invasion of privacy. And with predictions of subsequent waves coming along, potentially a second wave and then maybe even a third wave, what do you say to those who ask, well, will it stop? Will the government stop using, at some point, stop using the data of individuals? Can this sort of app be turned on or off?
Well, actually, privacy constitutes an essential part of civil rights in Korea. So therefore, we remain extremely vigilant against a possible abuse. But both privacy and the public health are values that we cannot keep in. We don't believe that a public sharing of information is at the expense of privacy, because public health is also quite important one. Saving lives is the main task of the government. That's why we enacted a legal framework to limit the scope of data and the utilization of data. And the public sharing of information is not focusing on any individual person. It's about the trajectory of virus. So letting people know about the level of risk they are exposed to and help them get tested before starting to transmit. And there is very broad consensus and support from the public about this public sharing of information. I'd like to emphasize that our principle in responding to COVID-19, one of the concept is freedom for all. Freedom for all, this concept means placing top priority on public health, and also as to maintain the freedom of movement and to minimize restrictions on business. So that is, we put freedom for all ahead of individual interests in general. So privacy issues, it's not, it's very well supported by public in Korea. We put great good in front of individuals' narrow interest.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you, Ambassador Park. So my next question is on a slightly different theme, and that's about soft power. And specifically by soft power, I'm referring to the idea that there are non-economic or military ways that nations can expand their reach and gain a greater platform on the global stage. And I think it's fair to say that one of the ways that Korea has certainly permeated into the West is that of the influx of culture. And I'm referring to two things in particular, and that is music and film. I think it's no secret to say that one of the revelations of the last few years has in fact been K-pop, and it's gained global popularity outside of Asia and in the West. And in addition to K-pop, you also have some absolutely fantastic films being made by some brilliant filmmakers, including Parasite, which won the Best Picture at the Academy Awards this year. I have two questions then. First of all, have you seen Parasite? What did you think of it? And also, why do you think there is a sudden influx of this culture in the West?
Yeah, I asked the film, and I invite here the British people to watch the film. I rented a theater, and we watched the film all together. And the reaction from the audience, British people, was it's very brilliant, and what an interesting plot. And also the story, the messages the film gives is quite a universal one. And it's about a story about a Korean, two Korean families, but it represents some commonality, the universal commonality that, so that's why the film appeals to international audience. As you say, soft power as something the power to attract foreign people to be interested in your culture and to inspired to learn more about that culture. So in that way, Korean soft power is, I think it's increased, and K-pops, K-music, and the number of students who are taking Korean language classes in the UK has tripled the last year, and we expected the number will grow, but because of this pandemic situation, we can't offer more classes as we planned. And we also planned the Korean Film Festival and Korean Food Festival and the Korean Music Festival this year, but sadly, all are canceled. And we are trying to work on more innovative way to share our culture with others through some different means. So we should be more innovative. And well, the reason why Korean culture is getting popular in the West, Korea has a long history and a unique beauty and attractions. UK is kind of a melting pot. You are very much open to other culture, and now it's Korea's time to enter into UK. To share our culture with all British people as a way to contribute to cultural diversity.
Well, if it means more brilliant films like Parasite, then I very much look forward to it. So my next question is goes back to what you spoke about, the economy, the adverse effects that COVID has had on the South Korean and Asian economies in general. And it's incredible to see the rise in South Korea's economy over the last few decades. It's gone from what many considered to be a relatively poor country to being the 11th or the 12th largest economy in the world. But there are now those that who are drawing attention to the fact that South Korea has the lowest birth rate in the world, and as a result of that, will have a diminishing workforce. Do you foresee any major issues that will arise to the South Korean economy as a result of that, and what the government can do to mitigate those potential effects?
Well, the Korean government perceived that the decreasing population, the lowest birth rate in the world, as quite a serious problem for our future economy. So we invested a lot. We made a budget allocation to boost the birth rate for last 10 years, but we found that those measures actually to encourage people to have more children, it didn't work as expected. So we want to see this problem from different angle, and we are now looking forward to the fourth industrial revolution, and the economy in the future will less depend on labor. So we will have more technology, high tech to sustain the economy, to grow the economy. So we need some paradigm change. In a way, diminish the population could be a blessing if we adjust our economy accordingly. Huge population, it is actually a burden to our earth and to our environment. So the population, I think if we manage it, if we adjust our economy in a wise way, then the diminishing population wouldn't be a big problem for our future economy.
I see. Okay, thank you very much, Your Excellency. So I have just one more question on my side, and then we will pass it over to the audience. If anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask the ambassador, you can submit them in the comment section of the feed. So my next question is one of, I suppose, personal curiosity, you can call it. There's no doubt that COVID and this pandemic and the ensuing lockdown has had significant and widespread effects on education, on the nature of work, and just the nature of how we live our lives in general. You, I would argue, have one of the most interesting and intriguing jobs of all of us, and that is as the head representative of your country to the United Kingdom. And so I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about specifically what your job as ambassador involves. What is your normal schedule like? Let's assume pre-COVID, what would your schedule be like? What activities do you normally undertake as ambassador?
Well, as ambassador, my daily life is very, very busy. I have meetings with British policy makers, including Westminster MPs and the laws, and we talk about our common interest, economic policy and national security, and international peers, and all those issues to develop common understanding and our understanding on the common direction. And I have meetings with my own delegations. We have so many delegations from Korea, business and science, culture, and all kind of delegations are coming from Korea, probably daily, 2-3 different delegations, and we have meetings with those delegations, and we have an extended meeting with our British counterparts. And I also have interviews with the British media on certain issues. When we had a series of negotiation with North Korea and the United States, the topic for the interview was North Korean nuclear issues. Then, during the pandemic, I had interviews with the BBC and other media on pandemic issues. So dealing with the media is one of my, as ambassador, quite big portion of my activities. And there is also many cultural events. As I said, that we have so many different festivals to share our culture with the British people. So we organize some cultural event, and then I attend to make some opening speech. And we have a large Korean British community here. Then we also have some interactions with our community. So it's quite a big diversity of activities. You know, as an ambassador, you are representing your country, and you are promoting your national interest in many different ways, and you are trying to find a win-win situation with your counterparts. So it's a very exciting job.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you touched on the large South Korean community living in the UK. In fact, I went to school just outside New Malden, which is a town, for those of you who don't know, in the southwest of London, where I think roughly 25% of the Korean population of the UK actually live. So some of you may have noticed the fact that I haven't actually asked any questions on North Korea yet. And the reason for that is we've had so many questions from the audience about the relationship between North and South Korea that I thought I'd ask some of your questions instead. But before I get onto those questions, we have a great number of questions from the audience about your journey as a diplomat and advice that you would give to young women who want to succeed in this field. So I'll begin by asking a question by a student who's by the name of Rebecca, who's actually just returned from a year abroad at Korea University. And she talked about the fact that while she was there, she attended a number of guest talks by diplomats and career officials in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but all of them were men. And as a young woman interested in pursuing a career in diplomacy, what advice do you have to women who want to succeed in what appears to be a male-dominated field?
Well, I don't know. I think there is quite a big difference in ways as women how to pursue your career. Because to be successful in one field, the qualification requirements are quite the same. So I may say that in order to succeed in the field you want to pursue your career, you need 3 P's. One is passion. When you have a passion, you can overcome all the difficulties, and you can overcome some male dominant environment. Well, then a second P is practice. You have to develop yourself. You have to develop your skill and your expertise to be competitive. So practice, practice, practice. And the third P is patience. Patience. And we are talking about our lifetime career. And within a few years, if you can't achieve what you wanted, you have to have a long-term perspective and you should be patient. Then, and I think you can achieve something at the end. And you talk about the male-dominant environment in Korea. I'm quite happy to see that we improved the situation a lot. When I joined the Foreign Ministry in 1985, there were only 2 female diplomats out of 1,500. But now, newly recruited junior diplomats, 60%, 70% are female. So you can see the dramatic change in Korean society.
Brilliant. So we have another question actually on diplomacy. And this is one that actually I'm quite interested to ask as well. And that is, are there any books that you recommend for those who are interested in a career in diplomacy?
Korean diplomacy.
Just a career in diplomacy. So any books that you would recommend for people to read?
There are so many books. So I can't think of any particular book, but in order to be a good diplomat, you have to know everything. So diplomats are generalists. You should know a bit of everything. And in addition to knowing everything, a little bit of everything, if you can have some expertise in a specific field, like disarmament or science or denuclearization or cultural diplomacy, if you have a special expertise in a specific field, then it will help a lot. So you should be a journalist basically, but you have to develop expertise on certain field.
I see. All right, thank you very much, Ambassador Park. Now, before you were ambassador, you held a great number of other very interesting roles, and there's one role in particular that I'm going to touch on in just a moment, and that will be in the context of the relations between North and South Korea, which, as I'm sure you can understand, we have a lot of questions coming in from the audience on that particular issue. And so before I ask the question, I'd like to give a little bit of context, and that is your role as protocol officer for President Kim Dae-jung. And for those of you who aren't aware, Ambassador Park in 2000 accompanied the then president to the first ever summit between North and South Korea, which must have been an incredible and unique experience. And so I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about what that experience was like, and also if you could comment on the current relationship between North and South Korea and how that might change as a result of an event such as the destruction of the joint liaison office in Kaesong that happened a few months ago.
Well, in the year 2000, I accompanied President Kim Dae-jung to Pyongyang. That was the first ever summit between South and North. And it was very historical. And I was a protocol officer, but at the airport, upon my arrival, immediately I forgot the mission I was assigned to. I just totally forgot what I should do because I was too much overwhelmed. And that sentiment, the emotional sentiment was widespread at that time. And a lot of South Koreans, they had a big expectation that, oh, it's the time to overcome all hostilities over 5-6 decades, and it's time to talk about unification. But later we realized that how difficult it is to solve the 6-7 decade long hostile relationship between South and North. Just one event, it can't solve the complex of the issues. Despite of last year, a series of summits, South-North Summit and the summit between United States and North Korea, now the situation is somewhat stand still. But I told you, as I said, this issue is really 7-decade long complex of mistrust and hostility. So we need to be patient, and we have to maintain the situation stable. Then we should continue to try to find the momentum to solve the problem through dialogue and negotiation. And just a few days ago, Kim Yo-jong, the leader's sister, she issued a statement expressing negative thoughts on talks process between United States and North Korea. And however, the statement still left a window open for dialogue. So it looks like they are in a sort of wait and see mode for now, particularly taking into account the upcoming presidential election in the United States. I don't think there will be any meaningful progress in negotiations. So, but the window for negotiation for possible peaceful solution and to build lasting peace mechanism on the Korean Peninsula, it's still open. And the opportunity is very narrow, but we have to try our best to keep it alive.
Do you think that's something that would change if Joe Biden were to be elected in the 2020 presidential election?
Well, it's difficult to say that if there is change in the leadership in the United States, there'll be a bigger chance for solving the problem. Because this is not an issue we can solve with just a one-time meeting or just a 2-3 meetings between summits. It needs quite a lengthy discussion and negotiation. What to give, what to take, and in what time frame, and how to build the roadmap to the final ultimate goal of denuclearization and peace mechanism settlement. And in Korea, I mean, it will take a long time. And I'm afraid to say that it is one of the hardest issues to solve. But we should not give up any hope.
Of course. If I could just add one more question on North Korea to that, and then I'll move to a different topic. And that's, you've stated that the goal, at least in the context of what we've discussed so far, is denuclearization. But there was the Declaration for Peace, Prosperity and Unification of the Korean Peninsula in April 2018 that was signed by both countries. So another goal perhaps would be reunification. And is reunification something that you feel that the Korean people from both the North and the South, is that something that they want, or is that something that is a political goal?
Well, unification is aspiration of Korean people. And in New Malden, you are familiar with that area. In New Malden, there are South Koreans and there are North Koreans. And they had a gathering to celebrate the New Year this year together, and they all expressed their aspiration for unification. But is it a real, policy goal to achieve? I think before we try to achieve unification, what we need is peaceful coexistence. So once peaceful coexistence is lasting, then we will be better. We'll be in better position to talk about unification. But peaceful coexistence is the priority.
Indeed, yeah, it's fascinating how the current president of South Korea, Moon Jae-in, he is the child of North Korean refugees, and has expressed that desire for unification. So let's see how that situation progresses. So the next question I'll ask, and I'm conscious of time, so we'll keep it just to one or two more. And that question is about Brexit, which some have argued is the defining moment, the defining political moment and political issue faced by the UK in a generation, and perhaps for a generation moving forward. And we have a question from Kate, who has asked, how do you view Korea's relationship with Britain in a post-COVID world? Will it change? You've talked about how when things go back to normal, you expect there to be an increase in trade, in the volume of trade between South Korea and the UK. And do you think that's something that will then further increase in the context of, say, a trade agreement after Brexit?
Yes, after Brexit, we hope that Korea and UK relationship will be further strengthened. We have quite a common bilateral interest in volume up our trade and investment, and we should work together for the forthcoming the fourth industrial revolution by joint research and development. And in addition to the economic perspective, South Korea and UK should work together post the Brexit. US and China competition will remain as a constant presence. And also we see the lack of leadership from the so-called G2 countries, like G2 countries, G7, and we don't see any strong leadership in global arena. So countries, like-minded countries like UK and South Korea, which are advocating universal values like democracy, free trade, multilateralism, rule-based international order, human rights, and we have to work together to revive the global economy and also multilateralism for better and peaceful world. So that is where we have to strengthen our partnership.
Fantastic. We'll leave it with one more short answer and short question, sorry, and then we'll leave it at that. And that is one that we received from the audience about, given the current economic difficulties and the increase in nationalist government across the world. Only a few days ago, there was an election in Poland where a more nationalist government was elected. Do you see an increase in the chances of an international conflict? And do you believe that we are heading for another global conflict?
We cannot predict which path we are going to take. That's actually the choice for us. We are going to take a path of a more narrow, national interest, or we will take another path of freedom for all and to build the world for all. So it's quite, up to us what kind of leader we will choose and what kind of path we will take. It's all, up to the people. We are talking about the challenges in leadership, but actually it is the challenges in fellowship. What kind of a leader we will follow. So it's up to us.
Very wise advice. Thank you very much, Ambassador Park. So I think we'll leave it at there in terms of questions. It's been an absolute delight and a pleasure to be able to speak to you on so many different issues. And on behalf of everyone in the audience and the Politics Society, a very big thank you to you for your time.
Okay, so thank you very much for giving me such a great opportunity to talk about Korea and talk about the UK and Korea bilateral relationship and also on global issues. And our two countries should cooperate to revitalize our global health regime and also our economy recovery. And if we work together, like-minded countries like UK and Korea, and definitely we can build a better world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Park. Well, and thank you all for joining us for this week's talk. I enjoyed that very much, and I certainly hope you all did as well. We actually don't have an event coming up next week. We thought we'd give you all a little bit of a break of the Politics Society. But after that, we have two fantastic events coming up. First, with Gina Miller, the activist and businesswoman who took the government to court, to the Supreme Court over Brexit and won both times. That'll be right at the end of July. And the week after that, we've got the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Professor Rowan Williams, to come and talk to us about religion in the 21st century, his thoughts on the current pandemic, and a number of other fascinating issues. So we'll leave it there for today. Once again, thank you all so very much for joining us, and I hope we'll see you next week.